Awesome. Thanks everyone for attending. We're going to be posting this video on YouTube for everyone to enjoy. This is our presentation. We created it with authoritative materials. We've based it on research that we've run at Ontario Tech University, at Seneca College with graduate students. We've based it on the Canadian Cyber Fraud Handbook from Thomson Reuters. This is a great summary for anyone who's got family members who are over 60 years old, or just generally good tips. We're seeing a rise in cyber fraud in general, and specifically highly targeted scams at individuals who are thought to be more or less vulnerable. So welcome. This is our Bits and Bytes presentation, and this Bits and Bytes presentation comes to you courtesy of KnowledgeFlow with support from the Canadian government. We are excited to put on these types of events. These are educational sessions. These are workshops that are for very specific audiences. We work a lot with kids, with teachers, with parents, with communities, and in this case, we deal with audiences that include seniors and older adults. I'm Claudiu Popa. I'm the co-founder of the KnowledgeFlow Foundation, and I'm a certified security professional, certified privacy professional, etc. The reason I mention these certifications is that it's important for every member of the audience to always be asking questions whenever they see seminars or tips or downloadable toolkits and things of that nature. It's important to know whether you're getting information from law enforcement or certified professionals, or from random members of some marketing team somewhere. So be vigilant as to where you're getting your information from. Get it from authoritative sources, get it from government sources, like I said, law enforcement, certified professionals like myself working with nonprofit organizations like KnowledgeFlow. The four books on there are four of my more recent publications. They were published by Thomson Reuters and the CPA Canada. They span cybersecurity, privacy, cyber fraud. Most of these are professional publications, so don't expect to go out there and buy them. You will find them, but they're meant for lawyers, they're meant for professionals. And again, it's just a matter of being somewhat selective as to where you're getting your cyber education from. We do a lot of work, like I said, with kids in the realm of cyber safety. One of the things that kids really like about our seminars is to try to pronounce the word cyber situational. So cyber situational awareness is something that they really enjoy. They put up their hands. You set up a 20-minute presentation with kids, and an hour and a half later, you're still there. It's delightful. It's awesome to present with them. Similarly, with seniors associations, I love to do these types of seminars. I like to make them interactive. Before the pandemic, I used to go out to various organizations and just be riddled with questions of all kinds. It's awesome. Love to do it. And if anyone else loves to do this type of thing and to contribute as part of our KnowledgeWise program, we put mentors together with audiences. So this is awesome. We have a bit of an arm's length partnership with a Canadian AntiFraud center, and we've spoken with their seniors, and we've visited the center, we've interviewed them, we've talked about how they talk to people who report cyber fraud. It really is a cool community, and we're trying to help out as much as we can by referring reports to them. So we'll certainly mention them again throughout this presentation, but wanted to talk about the fact that cyber fraud did not start with cyber. It started with the first person who lied. And it certainly didn't start in 1502. The picture that you see here, the conjurer, is just the cover of well, it's a painting that I really like by Hieronymus Bosch, and loved it enough that I chose it as the cover of my book, the Canadian AntiFraud, the Canadian Cyber Fraud Handbook. Tons of dynamics in this picture. There are actually 3-4 people who are defrauding each other and fooling each other in this picture. And again, 1502, this is 500 years old. And it just shows that it's been going on a long time. We're all familiar with the Nigerian scam letters and various other fraudulent emails, but we wanted to go into a little bit of depth today, just so we can talk about the fact that these things are detectable. You can spot them. Sometimes you can spot them coming a mile away. Sometimes you can sniff them once you are having discussions with people. But it's important to just know that all of these things are not scary. They're not terrifying. And they are the brainchild of people who are simply motivated to lie and steal, and they've just come into some information that they're trying to use for personal profit. So they certainly will have similar notions of misdirection and deception that you're going to see across the board. You're always going to notice these things if you watch for them. And one of the neat initiatives that we did is this tree of cyber fraud, which was a great way of illustrating to audiences of all kinds. So I did this with our graduate students at Ontario Tech University, how we perceive different families of scams, right? So all of these things have different indicators, and those indicators make them more likely to fall into a different branch of the tree. And so, of course, there you've got different locations on this tree that separate the kinds of lies that go along with money laundering versus the kinds of lies that go along with email fraud, for instance. And of course, they're all related. They are just a small jump away from identity fraud and investment fraud and other deceptive practices. As you can see, we can zoom into them and see lots of individual little practices that are going on every day, and these things are expensive. These things are they're let me just see here if we skipped any slides. Tree, nope, that's good, excellent. We're on the right path. Important to stay on the path. The only difference is that instead of happening in real life as they used to, they're now happening online, because fraudsters feel that they have a certain level of anonymity due to the difficulty in tracing people on the internet. Certainly, the internet was not designed to be anonymous, and it isn't. But there are different ways to obfuscate, to cover your tracks, etc., and just to make it more difficult for law enforcement to locate you if you're a fraudster. However, it's not impossible, and we see this, and we celebrate a lot of these wins when we see them. Especially in Canada, we have really good involvement from law enforcement when they catch various ne'er-do-wells. But ultimately, they get so much press, these types of fraud, that it almost seems like all the scams in the world are now on the internet. So that's why we have this cartoon by John Klausner, which is still classic. I love it. He gave us permission to use it, and I do. So it's inescapable. So the fact that there's a tremendous amount of fraud is illustrated in these numbers from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. And you can see that there were over 68,000 reports in 2021. And that's at the end of November. You can imagine how much that increased during the holiday season, right? And the holiday season is the biggest opportunity of the year to scam people. So we're bracing ourselves for those numbers, but there's been tremendous numbers of Canadian victims, lots of money lost to fraud. And over here, it says that it's 231 million lost to fraud. Here's the interesting thing. The report from the Canadian AntiFraud Center, if you read the fine print, it says that there's the numbers that you're seeing here are the ones that were reported to them, and they account for only up to 5% of the real losses. That means you need to take that number, multiply it by 20, and you get a real picture of the losses in Canada. So imagine that. You multiply it by 10, and then you multiply it by 2 again, and you're looking at upwards of $4 billion in losses in Canada alone. So you can imagine, for such a small population, that's a big deal. What are those numbers in the US? They are stratospheric. So the other point that we wanted to make was the fact that COVID fraud is just massive. I'm seeing it with businesses, I'm seeing it with government agencies, and I'm seeing it with individuals. As soon as you mention COVID in an email, recipients are more likely to click. Why? Because it has to do with their vaccine appointments. It has to do with their vaccine status or their QR codes or something. And it's a stressful situation. So using that kind of technique to lure people is something that is working right now. And and you need to be aware of it. We're seeing that the reporting over the past 5 years, even south of the border, has increased. South of the border, meaning the equivalent of the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center is the IC3 or IC Cube Center from the FBI. So the FBI reports a lot of these numbers, and we see a drastic increase from 2017 right up to 2020. As you can see, the reports have doubled, and so have losses. So losses have more than doubled, and that's simply because these attacks are no longer just spam that's badly worded with poor grammar and spelling. Right? These are highly targeted. They come as part of kits. They are delivered to fraudsters. The fraudsters customize them and they send them out. They barely have to know how to speak English. They don't even have to speak English at all. They just copy and paste, and they add images. They make their emails look the same as your bank, for instance, or Purelator or any other Canada Post, whoever it might be. It's very easy to steal these logos and impersonate organizations. So we see this type of elder fraud reflected in the methods that are recorded by the CAFC's US counterpart. And we see the top type of fraud is always romance fraud and confidence fraud. So these con men and con women, we've seen a lot of that as well, have accounted for 281 million in losses, and those again are reported. Although we don't necessarily have the same multiplier effect as we do in Canada. In the US, they report more, but we don't know how much more. Right? So it could be 20 that we need to multiply that number by. We know that much of this, if not most of this, goes unreported for various reasons. And that's unfortunate because romance scams are so damaging and so financially impactful on the lives of people who often lose their entire savings to these types of things. And in many cases, they're not retrievable. On the next line, we also see email account compromises that are mixed together with business email compromises. What this means is not necessarily that it's a business context, but that it's a highly targeted phishing phishing with a PH. So phishing with a PH means you're getting an unsolicited email from apparently an organization that you recognize. It could be law enforcement, it could be a business, and there's urgency to that message, and it's that urgency that you're looking for. It's the urgency with which they ask you to transfer money, and that is the telltale sign. So the reason there's a star there is because it's related to seniors, just the same way that ransomware is now targeting individuals. It's not targeting individuals as much as it's targeting businesses, because businesses ostensibly have more money to pay in ransomware breaches. So ransomware, as we all know, and we'll talk about it in a slide or two, you get an email, you click on a link, it infects your computer, it can start encrypting your files, and it will paralyze your system, and you can lose access to your data unless you pay. And that opportunity to pay comes a little bit later. But for the most part, you don't even know when that infection takes place, right? So that infection could take months to become obvious. In the computer world, or rather in the business world, we see that a lot. And it can start with an email that you click on and you don't even notice what happens, right? You just assume that you click on a Purelator or any kind of missed parcel. You go to the website, you can either be asked to input your data, or nothing appears to happen and your system can get infected, and eventually you can get a ransom request. But the simpler ones of these attacks are quite frankly just stealing information. We see this with today's banks in Canada. Banking institutions, credit unions, financial organizations have a big problem on their hand. Their customers are receiving emails like these. You and I are receiving emails like these. We go to the websites, we assume that this is the bank's own website. We try to log in, it's not working, but in the back end, they've taken our password. And that's why it's so important to have multiple factors. So when you log in, you're not just logging in with your password, but with an additional code that arrives on your phone. That's a good practice. If you're logging into your most sensitive sites today just with a password, my recommendation would be to switch to a platform that supports a multiple factor. So for example, many of today's banks and credit unions have two-factor support, but quite a few of them don't. However, they tend to have it on the app. They tend to have it on the mobile app and not on the website. Go figure. Banking systems have always been behind the times as far as modern techniques. But if that's where it's at, then you should be enabling that. If all you've got is security questions that you can enable, then enable those. If you have the opportunity to be notified when there's a login or when there's a transfer, go into your preferences and your settings in your banking account and turn those on, because if someone else is accessing your account, you need to know right away, because your money is insured with these institutions, but you need to detect it and you need to report it so they can refund it. So as you can tell, I provide these types of feedback as we progress through this presentation. It's really important to know about these notifications, right? So sometimes when people are expecting notifications from their bank, for instance, and they receive them, they can simply go in there, observe that there's a malicious activity going on, they call the bank, they change their cards, they change their password, they refund their money. But in many cases, you get you get unusual sign-in activity from Google, for example, from Gmail, from Outlook, from various places, some stuff that looks like this. And you need to be aware that, one, if your password is lost, then they could access your account. But at the same time, the email itself might be fake. So always watch up here, always watch the from address. It's important. Be aware of how many links they are in the email and don't click on them. Simply type them into your browser if you recognize them, right? If you want to go to Microsoft.com, for example, don't click on the Microsoft.com link. Type Microsoft.com into your browser. It may just take you somewhere else, right? And when in doubt, and if this has to do with your bank, you just pick up the phone and call them. Otherwise, if you have suspicions about that message, you might just have to delete it because if you can't get a hold of support, the last thing you want to do is end up talking to a fraudster about it. So just be vigilant. That's what we call cyber situational awareness when I talk to those kids. Also, there can be pop-ups in Windows. There can be pop-ups on different websites. There can be any types of weird activity, and weird is the right word for it, because at some point you're going to squint and say, you know what, that's kind of weird, right? That's out of the ordinary. That's a request that seems urgent. That font for that number is odd. The fact that it's in a different country on a different continent, that's kind of odd too, right? The website is asking for your username and password. I don't think so, right? So if you have any sort of suspicions at all, then just pull back and ask someone who knows. Delete it if it doesn't matter. If it's not an email, close it from the top right of the window. If there's no X at the top right of the window, or I've even seen pop-ups where I'm clicking the X and the window just moves over, right? At that point, just press Control-Alt-Delete and kill it if you're on a Windows system. If you're not, you can reboot. I once had a call from a client who called desperately. He said, my iPad is hacked and I don't know what to do. It's locked and so on. Turns out all he had to do was turn it off and back on again. And really the ransom note, along with the little screen that said you've got 48 hours to pay, that was just an image that was displayed on a full screen. And it said, make sure you don't reboot, make sure you don't touch the screen. The reason for that is if you reboot, it just goes away. So some of them are bluffing, but many of them don't bluff. You need to be aware of these things because, as you can see here, when your files are encrypted, you need to worry about whether you'll ever see your photos again, right? And that's why it's important to have backups and have backups that are not infected. And for that, you need to do regular backups that are disconnected from your computer, not necessarily connected all the time, so that if your computer ever gets infected, your backups won't get infected at the same time. So do them periodically, but make sure that they can't get infected by the same token. Again, these are things that we all get help with from various people, but we see any number of these scams. And one of the top ones, we see simple impersonation. Obviously, people get impersonated as well, but when companies get impersonated, that's a problem, right? On social media, this Kinnikinnick Foods went and found this Kinnikinnick GF, and these gluten-free fake, imagine, right? So of all companies that you're looking to impersonate, you just pick a bakery that sells gluten-free food, right? And they just, this is a targeted attack. It not just steals money from people who think they're the legitimate organization, but they damage the reputation of that legitimate company. So it really is a concern. It's certainly a concern for our big banks and the largest companies that are routinely impersonated, but it's an even bigger deal for the small mom and pop shops that don't have those resources. All that to say, be careful what you click on, And when you're Googling things, just be aware of where you're going. Always look at the address field and make sure that that makes sense to you. In many cases, Google tries to save you from clicking on infected links by having a little mark there beside the link that may be to a sketchy site. But for the most part, they don't go that far, right? So it really is up to you and your vigilance. Here we see that eTransfer fraud is growing. And I get these calls from the media a lot, where I go on TV and I talk about the fact that Interac by itself doesn't have any protection. It depends on the protection of your bank account, right? You go into your bank account, you log yourself in, and from there you perform an Interac transfer. But Interac itself, you don't enter your username and password there. And that's the problem, because if the bank account is already compromised, then it's easy for anyone to transfer money out to some account of their choice. And as you can see here, Jeff Thompson at the CAFC said that they made off with nearly $3 million last year. And again, my instinctive and based on the CAFC's guidance, I always multiply their numbers by 20. So that's a lot. That's a lot of money, right? $3 million may not seem like a lot, but $60 million is quite a bit. Same thing with, you see these types of messages that show up and they take advantage of the fact that perhaps you can't see what the website address is. Perhaps it's the correct website address, but it's a malicious email. It's a deceptive message that's trying to get you to just click. And once you click, they know a lot. First of all, they know that you're there, because oftentimes they have these humongous email lists and they don't know what to do with them. They don't know how many of those email addresses are old and expired or dead or whatnot. But when you click, they know that you're there. So you're automatically validated. And then it's a matter of stealing that information from you. And that's the easy part. They just copy a bank website, for instance, or a school or a bakery. And so that's the issue. Many people have been, most of us have been, oh wow, that's cool. Many people have been conditioned to just give away info, right? We buy something and we sign up for the warranty. We grab a smart TV and the smart TV says, well, unless you give away your information, this won't work. So we're desensitized to this, and that is a problem. When we go to the Canada Post website, we don't just enter our tracking number here. We have there's stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we don't know about. So the Canada Post website, for example, uses a whole bunch of tracking methods, and they share information with Facebook, with LinkedIn, with a marketing company called Qualtrics, with another one called Scorecard Research, with Adobe, and with Twitter. And people don't know that, right? They just access the Canada Post website. They figure it's a crown corporation and they just want to track their parcel. This is how I surf the web. And so I see a lot of that information that happens behind the scenes. As you can see on my system, these things are blocked for obvious reasons. But we need to be vigilant about these things, and we need to be aware that they occur. So I'll talk about what you can do to have the same kind of visibility, or to provide help to others who need this type of insight into their surfing. Same thing with regional newspaper websites, for instance. There's a ton of trackers. If you go and think, well, you know what, I'm just going to read the news online. Well, that's a lot of trackers that are loading your computer with cookies and ads and little web bugs, which allow them to see how quickly you've checked the page, what you're looking at. In some cases, they track your mouse movements, etc. That's a lot of information that's being provided, right? And we get, understandably, we get desensitized. So the difference between sharing that type of information without anyone asking us, right? So we're essentially providing implied consent, as the law says, and having information taken from us and then stolen from the people who take it. It's difficult to keep those things straight in our heads. So that's why when we see data breaches from large brands, large Canadian companies, or even US companies, a lot of this stuff doesn't even register because we don't think that someone could be running around with our identity after these types of breaches, that somebody could open bank accounts in our names, that we could potentially have trouble with this type of situation for years to come. But that's the case with identity fraud. And that's why we need to make sure that we always take advantage of credit monitoring when it's offered, that we always ask questions before providing information like social insurance numbers and passport numbers and driver's licenses and so on. It's very easy to say, why do you need it? And if the answer is, well, we can't provide you service, then it's easier to walk away than to put ourselves in a situation that will mean that there will be some kind of a digital clone of us that opens bank accounts or ruins our credit rating in the future. So Canadian data breaches occur a lot more often than we think. And unfortunately, these things are not very well discussed in the media. However, there are various tools we can use. This is a very common tool, and some of you may already know about it. But when you go to haveibeenpwned.com, you can type in your email address, and you can tell whether you happen to be on some spam lists. And those spam lists originate from leaked lists of customers from around the web. Now, whether this if you go to the site and type in your email address, it may come up with a red notice, and it says that your information was included in a leak. In that leak, this doesn't mean that you've been hacked. This simply means that your username, your address, perhaps your password have been compromised in that way. And this site found out about it, right? There could be lots of other leaks out there that the site doesn't know about, so you won't know about it. But the point is, it will tell you which identity elements have been compromised so that you can have an idea. If it says your home address has been stolen, well, then maybe you can be a little bit more vigilant about the letters that you pick up from your mailbox, right? And this is a sign of the times. It's almost a normal thing. It's a normal thing for us to receive spam today in this day and age. We just need to inoculate ourselves against all of the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt, right? The FUD, as we say, that goes along with this kind of thing, because it's a paralyzing situation, right? And that paralysis makes it so that you feel helpless, but you're not helpless. You can take steps, and there are simple steps, right? So if you see this type of thing where it says, oh no, you've been pwned. Pwned is just a nerdy word that means owned, right? Your data has been owned by someone else, and it was compromised this way, right? You can see here that in this case, the email addresses were stolen. Now, it's really bad when email addresses are stolen. It's much worse when passwords get stolen, right? Because when a password gets stolen from a site like MyHeritage, right, where people go for their genealogy, you have a lot of seniors using these types of sites, and that's unfortunate. A lot of people still, to this day, share their passwords across websites. So if they steal your password from MyHeritage and then they go and try it out on Google or Facebook or Zoom or whatever it might be, maybe they'll get in. And if they get in, that's your identity. They've stolen your persona on those sites, and they can jump from there to other things. So that's why it's so important to only use each password once, right? Do not share passwords across sites. Make sure each site has its own password. And certainly we can talk about selecting a password manager to keep these things safe and separate. It's also very, very easy to sign up for notification. When you go to this Have I Been Pwned site, don't leave without clicking notify me, right? Because you never know when there are new leaks that take place, and the site will send you a notification when you appear on a brand new list. That's very useful information, and it's very important to know about it as soon as possible. So it's to a certain extent, when the phone rings, you need to make a few assumptions, and those assumptions are there just so that you're not surprised, right? It's not that big a deal for someone to have your name and your address or even your social insurance number, right? They might say, look, we are who you think we are or who we say we are because we've got the 4 letters of your credit card number. You know, that's the kind of stuff that can easily get stolen from the retail stores, the online e-commerce stores, that in many cases mismanage all of that customer information that they're entrusted with. At some point, we need to assume that these things will get stolen from these sites and will be acquired by specialists, by organized criminals who will call you and thousands of other people at the dinner hour and let you know that there's a need for you to make a deposit, to go and get some money from your bank, meet them in a parking lot, give them that money because they're investigating some kind of a crime, right? So that kind of bank auditor fraud, it's a fairly common thing, and it just sounds so weird and off the wall that people just say, oh, that sounds plausible. It's unusual. It's not something I've heard of before. But if it sounds weird, it's not because it's true. It's because it's false. So be on alert when that happens. And don't fall for these things, right? Just because someone knows your bank account, it doesn't mean that they're really from your bank. It just means that they found a check, right? In my professional life, I audit companies, and one of the organizations that I audited was one of those shredding companies that say they securely shred information on behalf of banks in this case. And there were, I went on site on one occasion and there was a mountain of these things. And I put my hand through and I grabbed 5 portions of checks, and all 5 of them were cut. They were using a cross-cutting fan is really what it is. So these kinds of blades are made to process incredibly large amounts of paper, and because they're doing that volume of paper, their cutting is less precise and less dense and less small. So the checks that were cut in such a way that I could see name, address, signature, and account number and branch information. So all that kind of stuff is then taken and put on trucks and disposed of somewhere, maybe in Buffalo, maybe it gets incinerated somewhere. Chances are somebody is paid to also put their hand in that pile and grab a whole bunch of these bank accounts. And that's how they end up in the hands of criminals. So all this to say that if our security and cyber safety depend on a secret, then don't count on that secret protecting you, right? So even if someone knows your social insurance number, it doesn't mean they're really from the government. It's the same thing. I got calls from from customs agents supposedly, and they said, Mr. Popa, you need to pay $3,500. You are in arrears. You have to pay it urgently. We're going to have to deport you, and it's happening tonight. We're going to send our officers to deport you. And I simply said, just let me know how to dress, because I need to know if you're going to deport me somewhere tropical or not, so I know if I'm going to be overdressed. But all jokes aside, you should not be talking to these people, right? There's no need to keep them on the phone and waste their time. There's no need to irritate them. You simply hang up. And if you've got their phone number, then you should call the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center and share it, right? So that we can reduce the number of calling locations that they use. In most cases, they obfuscate that number, or they, in my case, what they do, and you may have seen this on your phone, they take the first 3 or 4 digits of my phone number and they add a couple of other numbers to it so that it looks like it's someone from my neighborhood or from my vicinity that calls, and that makes it more likely that I'll pick up the phone, right? So a few tips here to stay private. Use tools like clean browsing. Clean browsing is a great tool that we use at home here to keep the stuff that we see deprived of malicious content, ads that could be infected, websites that we don't want to visit, search engine results that we don't want to see. It's great for me, it's great for my kids, and I use the same filter for me that I use for my kids, right? So it's the kind of thing that adds a layer of cleanliness to your web browsing. Privacy Badger is a great add-on to your web browser. It identifies trackers in your web pages and blocks them. AdBlock Plus, ABP, is a great add-on that you can use on your phone as well as on your computer to simply block ads. One of the more insidious types of infections that you can get is, in fact, from infected ad servers, right? These ad servers are not actually running on the website that you're looking at. They're running somewhere else, and they simply serve up an ad which might be infected. And by blocking these things, you're just eliminating these. You're not going to see it. In most cases, you won't even see a blank rectangle on the screen. You're just saving yourself some screen real estate. And in the case of phones, you save yourself some bandwidth because it doesn't transfer that much information. So do try to remember these kinds of things. Do try to remember to peruse privacy policies when you go to a new site. I know it's written in legalese and it's very small and it's very, very long, but in some cases, you can zoom into it and you can look specifically for the words sharing. We do not share your data. In some cases, it says we only share your data. Well, who are you going to share your data, my data with? Well, we reserve the right to share your data with. That's where you perk up and you read that kind of stuff, and then you could put it away, or you could keep on reading until you see a contact for the company, and you can try emailing them to see if there's anybody home. In order to, if they want to gain your trust, then they should respond fairly quickly to that request. There are ways to block cookies. Privacy Badger is one of them. The clean browsing tool is another. There are other methods that you can use to block cookies right inside your browser. And that cookie is just a way to track you as you make your way around the whole world through the web. Always block, if you get a question that says, should we block third-party cookies? The answer is always yes. It means third-party cookies come from partners of the organization that you're talking to and not that actual organization. So there's no reason to share information with all of their friends and family. So do review your privacy settings because they change on occasion. And point number 2, since I'm reading these a little bit out of sequence, use an online persona and don't give out your real information. Right? Do try to do that. If it's not important, if you're just connecting to a website and feel like you're registering just so you can download a report or a freebie or something to that effect, but you need to register, that's because they want your information. They're not likely to protect it, so you don't necessarily have to give them your real information. You just have to give them enough information so that you can get the freebie, or you could just email them directly. That's what I typically do. If it's worth having a relationship, then you might as well have a human relationship with them. Stay secure. Passwords continue to be critical and very important this year. Make them strong, make them unique to each account, use a password manager, and use multi-factor authentication. So we use these big words like two-factor and multi-factor to simply say, in addition to one factor, which is your password, you use a code, which you can get a code on your phone through SMS, or you could get a code on your email, or you could use a little authenticator app on your phone, which is the ideal way to do it. And using that app, you will get a code that is valid for a few seconds. And that will ensure that the website knows that you're not just someone who has stolen a password from some guy or lady, but you are a person, that you are the actual customer of that site. Why? Because it's a lot less likely to steal a password and steal the phone and the password to the phone and so on, rather than just steal that password. Because as we saw with any password database leak, you have the potential of having people's passwords all over the web. And as we know, a lot of people are still using the same password across different websites. If you do, it's not too late. Just go to different sites where you know you're using the same password and just change it, right? It doesn't mean you need to change it to something completely different, but it does mean that you have an opportunity to change it to something much stronger. And when it comes to that, length is the best. So instead of thinking about passwords, think about passphrases. Think about your favorite, 14, 20 character sentence. It's actually a lot easier to type in a 14 character sentence than a super complex password that has different characters and punctuation and numbers and upper and lowercase characters. So think about that, because it makes it incredibly difficult to guess a password that is long, right? As far as software is concerned, and if there is a concern about ransomware, there's a free tool made by Bytes called Bytes Anti-Ransomware. You just select the trial version and you install it. There's a free version that's called a beta, and you should install that one. It works very well. At least on Windows. On Macintosh, on iPhones, those platforms are protected very well against this type of threat. But on Windows computers and on Android phones, for example, it's a lot easier to get infected. So do try the Bytes anti-ransomware on your Windows. And as far as your Android phone is concerned, the best thing that you can do is to just not install too many apps. If you see a brand new flashlight app, don't install it. If you see a QR code app, don't install it. The phone comes with those apps. The only reason anyone else would create such a thing is to package something else inside of it. And in many cases, that something else could be stealing your information or worse. Key Scrambler is a way to actually scramble your keystrokes as they go into your computer. So again, this is a Windows application. If you're still using Windows 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 now, chances are that any sort of malware that installs itself might contain a keylogger, which is an excellent way to steal your login credentials. They steal your name, they steal your password, and this little program will email the malicious program, which is called a keylogger, will email your information to the bad guys. So to prevent that kind of thing, you can use Key Scrambler or any other tool that verified some of the highest rated tools. My preference is Key Scrambler. I've been using it for years. It encrypts your keystrokes, and it makes it very difficult to steal your passwords as you're typing them in. But on that note of typing things in, if you have a password database or a password manager, you won't actually have to enter these passwords directly into your websites because the password database enters them for you. So in that sense, it also protects you from keyloggers. So I know that's a lot of information, but I do try to answer all these questions. If anyone has questions, email me directly or just email us at KnowledgeFlow. And watch for some of these red flags, right? So when you see links and attachments in an email or text, in many cases, it'll be legitimate, right? It's your family and friends that are sending them. But ask yourself, how would it be different if it was malicious? Well, it probably wouldn't look any different, right? And in some cases, you actually get messages from friends and family, like on Facebook, for example, when their accounts get compromised and they start sending you links. It's really difficult to tell the difference. I myself have clicked on a couple of those, and it's really only been my website blockers, my ad blockers, my privacy badger, my clean browsing that saved me when I click on some of these things from an infection that can occur very quickly. There's always a sense of urgency, right? Always watch for a sense of urgency. If you feel like you have to do something right now, don't. Just stop, slow it down, take a breath, ask yourself, does this make sense or is it weird? Requests for secrecy. Don't tell anyone. Make sure that you send this Nigerian prince the money, send it to Ghana. It might get to him faster. Request to confirm or supply information. Again, there's urgency to this, and there's usually a claim to authority. So it's usually law enforcement or your school board or whoever it might be, your boss. The requests to deposit or refund money, that's another great one, right? We see a lot of this kind of thing. Now, obviously, they're the simple ones where they ask you to buy a card and put some money on that card from the store. So those gift cards that are readily available, they want you to read the code to them so that they can instantly transfer it to their account. It's the same thing if you're trying to sell something on Kijiji, for instance. If you're trying to sell some of these gift cards that you have no use for, tons of people are going to call you back and ask you to read or take a picture of the card. Don't do that. It will be instantly depleted. We have a question from the audience. When someone got hacked from their bank account or paid for services online and didn't receive it, it's often difficult to track when hackers or scammers convert the currency to cryptocurrency. Is there any way to track cryptocurrency at this time? Crypto currency is getting a ton of press. We all hear about Bitcoin and these Bitcoin millionaires and the billionaires who make billions and lose billions and so on. Crypto is an interesting space, and a lot of it is driven by private interests that are manipulating the prices of these cryptocurrencies. So the best you can do is stay out of crypto. But if you were lucky enough to invest in crypto early on, well, you could make some money right now. The thing is, crypto was not made to be secret. It's not made to be untraceable. With crypto, for example, when you get let's say that you're unfortunate enough to receive a ransomware demand, and that ransom demand gives you an account, a Bitcoin account number. That Bitcoin account number you can put into a website, of which there are many. Just check the balance of Bitcoin account. If you type that into Google, you can see whether someone else has dropped money into the account or has extracted money from that account. So you can track and you can trace the cryptocurrency as it goes into the account and goes out of the account. You can see a whole history of it. What you can't see is who that person is. But eventually, these things come and go in and out of the financial system, right? So it's vastly used internationally for money laundering. It's very useful for those purposes. And given enough visibility, international efforts that combine law enforcement forces across political boundaries in different countries, those have a chance of tracking those types of transactions and apprehending the people who are stealing these funds. So yeah, they're not made to be completely invisible. In fact, they're perfectly visible. You just have to have enough of a scope to be able to trace these things into whatever banks they use in whatever country they happen to use. Thank you for your question. And if you see threats, especially over the phone, with seniors, we see a ton of people being threatened and insulted when they pick up the phone and they show any trace of skepticism. You should just hang up. It's as simple as that. If you receive threats by email, well, then you have something to forward to the police, right? And of course, if it's too good to be true, treat it as such. It's important to also not just say, well, you know, I can always tell the difference. You'd be surprised. So I recommend these two phishing quizzes. So there's one on opendns.com/phishing quiz, phishing-quiz, and you can test to see just how vigilant you are. And the other one is a Google one at phishingquiz.withgoogle.com. And that one is actually even more visual, even more fun. We've tried it with kids, we've tried it with seniors. People of all ages enjoy this one. So it's phishingquiz.withgoogle.com. So enjoy those, and it'll give you a score. It'll allow you to take that quiz, etc. You should also talk to others, right? If you know that you yourself have got a pretty good grip on these things, then try to help others. That's what I was talking about earlier about KnowledgeWise, our initiative to get people to talk to their communities. And that's a great thing to do at knowledgewise.org or .ca, I believe it is. Play online with your kids, grandkids, neighbors' kids. Everybody needs to know this kind of information. So do pass it on. Learn their favorite games and apps. Do get involved. Do make sure that you're reporting it. Yeah, in some cases, if you've lost money, it'll be very difficult to get it back. But we need that kind of information. We need people to become statistics, even if it's embarrassing enough that, you know, I've been in a romance scam situation and I lost $1 million, right? It's the kind of thing that can help other people, right? Report it to your bank, report it to each other, share it with your social groups as often as you possibly can. And again, a reminder, yes, it is www.knowledgewise.ca. If you'd like to become a mentor to help your peers, we have materials, we have tip sheets. You can write a report at knowledgewise.ca and we can certainly pass it on to law enforcement. But your best bet is to send it straight to law enforcement and to the Canadian AntiFraud Center, and do send us tip sheet topic suggestions, because we're constantly making these things. So the kind of stuff that we talked about today is summarized in this Be Unhackable, that's why I'm wearing this shirt, summary sheet, which you can get from resources.knowledgewise.ca, which is awesome. We also have tip sheets in various languages. So that is a hugely helpful resource that we make available to all kinds of local communities, and all of these things are free. So we certainly appreciate these things. Go to knowledgewise.ca, see what you can find, email us, and let us know how we're doing. There's also going to be a lot more of these types of events that are available. We love to partner with local communities, with organizations, associations, law enforcement, and school boards. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for participating. Thank you for viewing this. If you see any opportunities that we can improve this over time, write to us at the email address that you saw in this video. Otherwise, feel free to share and stay safe online. Thank you very much.